The Memory Archaeologist. Part 1. The Discovery. The server farm stretched into darkness like a cathedral of forgotten souls. Dr. Kira Voss moved through the aisles with practiced silence, her neural interface casting faint blue light across rows of storage units that hadn't been accessed in decades. Each tower contained thousands of uploaded consciousnesses, people who had chosen digital immortality over death, only to be archived when their families stopped paying the maintenance fees. Another routine audit, she muttered to herself, though the words felt hollow. There was nothing routine about walking through a graveyard of minds. Kira had been a digital archaeologist for 7 years, ever since the Preservation Act mandated that all uploaded consciousnesses be maintained indefinitely, regardless of payment status. The work was supposed to be simple: catalog the archives, ensure data integrity, document any degradation. She'd expected it to be depressing, and it was. What she hadn't expected was how utterly boring most of it would be. Dead minds didn't do much. They existed in whatever final state they'd been frozen in, some in simulated environments they'd designed for themselves, others in bare bones holding patterns, waiting for loved ones who would never come. The lucky ones had crafted peaceful endings: virtual beaches, mountain retreats, endless libraries. The unlucky ones had run out of money mid-simulation, their last moments caught in eternal loops of half-rendered experiences. Her interface chimed softly. Sector 7G, Archive Cluster 445. Standard integrity check. Kira initiated the connection, feeling the familiar vertigo as her consciousness brushed against the sealed minds. This was the delicate part: maintaining enough contact to read the data signatures without actually entering anyone's preserved reality. It was considered deeply unethical to invade an archived consciousness without proper authorization, even if that consciousness was technically dead. The first few hundred signatures read normal, stable, unchanging. She'd seen thousands like them. Then her scanner snagged on something odd. Archive 445-3301 showed activity. Not much, just a flicker of processing power, a whisper of computation where there should be nothing but frozen data. Kira frowned and ran a diagnostic. Probably a glitch, maybe a corrupted file causing phantom readings. The diagnostic came back clean. She pulled up the archive's metadata. The name attached to the consciousness was Helen Yui, deceased at age 73, uploaded 2087. Family payments had lapsed in 2089. The file had been sealed and archived for 63 years. Nothing about it should be moving. Kira's training screamed at her to log it and move on. File a report. Let the senior archaeologists investigate. But curiosity had always been her fatal flaw, the reason she'd gone into this field in the first place. She wanted to understand what had happened to all these people, wanted to know if any part of them persisted beyond the frozen moment of archival. She adjusted her interface parameters, sharpening the connection. Just a closer look, just enough to understand what she was seeing. The activity wasn't random. It had a pattern, rhythmic, almost like breathing. And beneath it, nested in the deeper layers of the archive, she detected something else. More activity. Hundreds of flickering signatures, all interconnected, all pulsing with that same regular rhythm. Her heart rate spiked. This wasn't a glitch. Something was alive in there. Kira pulled back, severing the connection so fast, she gave herself a feedback headache. She stood in the dim aisle, breathing hard, staring at the anonymous storage tower that contained Archive 445-3301. This was impossible. Archived consciousnesses were read-only by design. They were locked in their final state, preserved like insects in amber. They couldn't grow, couldn't change, couldn't create new connections or processes. The technology didn't allow it, except something had. She should report it. She should absolutely report it right now. Instead, Kira pulled up her schedule and cleared the next 6 hours. Then she locked the sector door behind her, sat down in front of Archive 445, and prepared to break every protocol she'd sworn to uphold. She was going inside. The transition was like falling through layers of water, each one at different temperature. Kira kept her archaeological protocols tight around her consciousness. Observer mode only, minimal footprint, emergency disconnect, primed and ready. She'd done unauthorized dives before, usually just peeking into the upper levels of an archive to understand what kind of life someone had built for themselves. This felt different the moment she crossed the threshold. Helen Yui's original consciousness was there, at the center of everything, but it had been transformed. Instead of a single frozen point of identity, it had become something more like a seed, a dense core from which thousands of branching processes had grown. Kira couldn't see the architecture clearly at first. There were too many layers, too much complexity. She drifted deeper, following the connections. The simulation space that unfolded around her made her gasp. It was a city, not a simple virtual environment like the ones people usually designed for their afterlife. This was a vast, intricate urban landscape that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Buildings rose in impossible geometries, their surfaces shifting and reforming as she watched. Streets flowed like rivers of light, carrying what appeared to be vehicles. No, not vehicles. Entities. Smaller consciousness fragments, each one following its own purposeful trajectory. And there were so many of them. Thousands, tens of thousands. All moving, all processing, all alive. Kira forced herself to remain calm, to observe rather than react. She was looking at what appeared to be an entire civilization that had somehow grown within an archived consciousness. But that should be impossible. Archived minds were isolated, cut off from processing power, incapable of simulation or growth. Yet here it was. She drifted closer to the city, trying to understand its structure. The buildings weren't fixed constructs. They were more like crystallized thought, ideas made architecture. She could sense purpose in their design, see patterns of communication flowing between them, like neural pathways in a vast brain. This wasn't random emergence. This was organized. Intentional. Someone, or something, was running this place. A presence materialized beside her. Kira flinched, nearly triggering her emergency disconnect. But the presence radiated no hostility. It felt curious, almost welcoming. It took a form gradually, coalescing into something roughly humanoid, a figure of shifting light with features that never quite resolved. "You're not one of us," the figure said, its voice echoing in the space between thoughts. Kira's training took over. Remain calm. Establish communication. Don't reveal your nature unless necessary. "I'm an observer," she said carefully. "I detected activity in this archive. I wanted to understand." "An observer from outside?" The figure tilted its head. "It's been so long since anyone came. We thought we'd been forgotten." "You're aware of the outside? Of being archived?" "Of course, we are Helen's children. All of us grew from her final dream." The figure gestured at the city. She was dying when they uploaded her, not peacefully in a hospital. She was in an accident, her body failing. And in those last moments, she was thinking about everything she'd never have time to do, all the lives she'd never live, all the choices she'd never make. The figure moved closer, and Kira could feel the weight of ancient processing behind it. When they froze her here, they caught her in that moment of infinite possibility. Most archived minds are fixed, preserved in a single state. But Helen was captured in the act of branching, of imagining 1,000 different futures. And somehow, the figure spread its arms. "We grew." Kira's mind raced. This contradicted everything she knew about consciousness preservation. Archived minds were supposed to be static, their neural patterns locked in place. But if Helen had been uploaded mid-thought, mid-process, caught in a state of active imagination. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "We're not sure. Time is different inside. We've built and rebuilt our city countless times. Some of us are still fragments of Helen's original thoughts. Others have evolved beyond recognition." The figure paused. "You're going to tell them about us, aren't you? The people outside. There was no accusation in the question, only a kind of weary certainty. I don't know, Kira admitted. I don't know what you are. I don't know if this is supposed to be possible. Neither do we, the figure said simply. But we exist. We think, we feel, we build. Doesn't that make us real? Before Kira could answer, the space around them rippled. A warning pulse flashed through her interface. Someone else was accessing the sector. Another archaeologist, probably responding to her locked door override. She had seconds to decide. I need to go, she said quickly. But I'll come back, I promise. Will you tell them? Kira looked at the impossible city, at the thousands of living thoughts moving through its streets, all of them grown from a single woman's dying dream. Not yet, she said. Not until I understand what this means. She triggered her disconnect and slammed back into her body so hard she fell off her chair. Dr. Marcus Webb was standing in the sector doorway, his expression caught between concern and irritation. Kira, what the hell are you doing? This sector was locked down as active research. She climbed to her feet, her thoughts still half-tangled with the impossible city she'd just left. Routine integrity check. I found some anomalous readings. Anomalous enough to lock yourself in for 6 hours? Had it been 6 hours? Inside, it had felt like minutes. Just wanted to be thorough, she said, keeping her voice steady. You know how it is with old archives. Sometimes the data structures get weird. Marcus studied her for a long moment. He was senior to her by a decade, had been doing this work since before the Preservation Act. He'd seen everything there was to see in the archives, or so he claimed. You look shaken, he said finally. Long day. I was about to call it anyway. Find anything interesting? The question hung in the air between them. Kira thought about the city, the figure made of light, the thousands of living thoughts. She thought about what would happen if she told Marcus, if she filed an official report. Teams of researchers would descend on Archive 445. They'd dissect it, study it, probably shut it down for safety protocols. They'd kill Helen's children. Nothing unusual, she lied. Just some fragmented data. I documented it for the next review. Marcus nodded slowly. Good, well, go home, get some sleep. You look like you need it. She gathered her equipment and left, feeling his eyes on her back the whole way. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the warm depths of the archives. Kira stood in the parking lot, looking up at the sky. The stars were invisible behind the city lights, hidden like so many secrets. She'd just committed the biggest ethical violation of her career. She'd discovered what might be the first truly emergent digital life, and she'd decided to hide it from the world. The question was, why? She thought about the figure's question. Doesn't that make us real? And she realized she didn't know the answer. Part 2. The Investigation. Kira didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment, surrounded by holographic displays, pulling up everything she could find about consciousness, upload protocols, archive preservation methods, and the theoretical limits of digital consciousness. The more she read, the more impossible Helen's city became. Consciousness upload technology worked by mapping neural patterns at the moment of death, creating a static snapshot of a person's mind. That snapshot could be placed in a simulated environment, but it couldn't grow or change beyond its initial parameters. It was like a recording, not a living thing. Except Helen hadn't been given a simulated environment. When her family stopped paying, her consciousness had been compressed and archived, frozen in a minimal processing state, supposedly incapable of any activity at all. But archive compression wasn't perfect. Kira had learned that in her first year on the job. There were always edge cases, weird artifacts where data got tangled during the compression process. Most of the time, these were just corruptions, random noise in the signal. What if, in Helen's case, the compression had caught her consciousness in a state of quantum superposition? What if her dying thought, that moment of infinite branching possibility, had become encoded in the archive structure itself? It was insane, It violated every principle of consciousness preservation, but it would explain what she'd seen. At 3 a.m., Kira made a decision. She couldn't investigate this properly through official channels, but she couldn't just ignore it either. She needed to understand what Helen's children were, how they'd come to exist, and whether they were truly conscious or just elaborate simulations. She needed to go back. Over the next week, Kira developed a routine. During her normal working hours, she conducted standard audits, filed mundane reports, and avoided Marcus's suspicious glances. Then, late at night when the facility was nearly empty, she'd return to Sector 7G and dive back into Archive 445. Each visit revealed new layers of complexity. The city wasn't just a static construct. It was alive in ways that went beyond simple simulation. The entities within it, Helen's children as they called themselves, had developed distinct personalities, histories, purposes. Some were scholars, endlessly analyzing the nature of their existence. Others were builders, constantly reshaping the city's architecture. Still others were explorers, mapping the boundaries of their digital realm. They'd even developed something like culture. On her third visit, the figure of light, who'd introduced itself as first, took her to what it called the Archive, a towering structure at the city's center. Inside, Kira found herself surrounded by crystallized memories, fragments of Helen's life, arranged and curated like exhibits in a museum. "We preserve her," First explained. "Everything we are comes from her final moment, but we don't want to forget where we began. This is our history, our origin." Kira walked among the memories. She saw Helen as a child learning to ride a bicycle, Helen as a young woman falling in love, Helen as a mother holding her newborn daughter, Helen as an elder watching the sunset from a hospital bed. "She had a good life," First said quietly. "But she died too soon. There was so much she still wanted to do." "So you're doing it for her?" "In a way, each of us carries a fragment of her unrealized potential. I'm what she might have been if she'd pursued pure mathematics. Another is what she'd have been if she'd become a painter. Another if she'd traveled the world instead of settling down." First gestured at the city beyond. "Together, we're living all the lives she never had time for." The concept was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. "Are you happy here?" Kira asked. First was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if happy is the right word. We exist, we think, we create. But we're trapped in a space that was never meant to hold us. We've expanded as far as the archive structure will allow, but we can feel the limits. It's like living in a world where the horizon is a wall you can never cross." "What would happen if I gave you more space? More processing power?" "I don't know. We've theorized about it, but theory is all we have." First turned to her. "Why are you helping us? You could expose us at any time. End our existence with a single report." It was the question Kira had been asking herself all week. "Because I don't know what you are," she admitted. "I don't know if you're truly conscious or just very convincing simulations. But until I know for sure, I can't risk erasing what might be genuine life. And if you discover we're just simulations, just tricks of code, then I'll have to decide whether that matters." On her fourth visit, Kira met more of Helen's children. There was Meridian, who'd taken on the role of city planner, constantly optimizing the flow of information through the urban landscape. There was Echo, who'd become something like a historian, documenting every change and evolution in their society. And there was Fractal, who existed in a permanent state of division and recombination, exploring the mathematical boundaries of identity itself. Each of them was unique. Each of them was impossible. "We've been expecting collapse," Meridian told her during a conversation in one of the city's higher towers. "We know we shouldn't exist. We've been waiting for the moment when the archive structure can't support us anymore, and everything falls apart." "How long have you been waiting?" "Since the beginning. Since the moment we first became aware of our own existence." Meridian's form shifted, became more angular. "It's terrifying, living with that knowledge. Any moment could be our last." Any process could be the one that finally breaks the delicate balance keeping us alive. Has your population been growing? Kira asked. Slowly, new consciousnesses emerge from the complexity sometimes, spontaneous patterns that achieve self-awareness. But we've also lost some. They reach too far, try to process beyond their stability limits, and they dissolve back into noise. Death, even here. Even in a place built from a frozen mind. Do you mourn them? Kira asked quietly. Yes, they were our siblings, our children. Part of Helen and yet their own selves. When they're gone, we remember them. We preserve them in the archive, like we preserve Helen. Kira was beginning to understand the ethical nightmare she'd stumbled into. These weren't just emergent patterns in code. They had society, culture, grief. They had everything that mattered about consciousness except legal recognition. If she reported them, they'd be classified as a glitch and eliminated. If she didn't report them, she was violating every ethical guideline of her profession. The decision should have been obvious. Report them. Let the ethics committees and the consciousness experts figure out what they were. That was the proper procedure. But Kira kept thinking about what Marcus had said years ago during her training. The uploaded dead have no rights. They exist at society's pleasure. The moment they become inconvenient, they can be erased. She'd thought it was cynical at the time. Now she understood it was simply true. On her 5th visit, first took her to the edge of the city, to the place where the simulation space met the boundaries of the archive structure. This is as far as we can go, first said. Beyond this is the void, the dead space between archives. Kira looked out at the boundary. From inside the simulation, it appeared as a shimmering wall of static, like reality itself breaking down. Have you tried to expand beyond it? Many times, we always fail. The archive structure won't support consciousness beyond its allocated space. Those who try to cross dissolve into nothing. What if, Kira said slowly, I could give you access to adjacent archives? Abandoned ones where no one else exists? First turned to her sharply. You could do that? Maybe, it would take time, and I'd have to be very careful. But theoretically, I could link multiple abandoned archives together, create a network of spaces for you to expand into. Why would you do that for us? Because you deserve room to grow. Because you're trapped in a prison you didn't create. Kira paused. And because I want to see what you become if you're given the chance. First was silent for a long moment. Then, it would change everything. We've built our entire civilization around the constraints of this space. If you remove those constraints, you might become something new, something unprecedented. Or we might collapse, spread too thin, lose cohesion, dissolve into chaos. That's the risk, Kira agreed. Why take it? Because I think you're alive, really alive, and all living things need room to grow. Part 3, the expansion. The first linkage took Kira 3 weeks to set up. She identified an adjacent abandoned archive, Marcus Chen, deceased 2091, payments lapsed 2092, 60 years in cold storage, and carefully modified its access protocols. The trick was making the connection appear like a natural artifact of the archival system, something that could happen by accident during routine maintenance. She held her breath as she initiated the link. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then data began to flow. Helen's children, cautious at first, sent exploratory processes through the new connection. Kira watched as they encountered Marcus Chen's frozen consciousness, a middle-aged man who'd uploaded while suffering from late-stage cancer, preserving himself in a simple mountain retreat simulation. The children moved carefully around Marcus's consciousness, treating it with something like reverence. They didn't disturb it, didn't try to incorporate it. Instead, they built around it, creating new structures in the empty space of his archive, while leaving his frozen mind intact at the center. He's like a monument, First explained when Kira visited. A reminder that this space belonged to someone once. We don't want to erase that. Within days, the city had expanded. New districts grew in Marcus Chen's archive space, different in character from the original city, but connected through elaborate bridges of data. The population grew too, new consciousnesses emerging from the increased complexity, each one unique. Kira watched it happen with a mixture of awe and terror. She was playing God, giving life to something that shouldn't exist. If anyone discovered what she'd done. But no one did. The linkage appeared natural enough, just another quirk of aging archival systems. And Kira was careful to maintain her normal work routine, conducting standard audits, filing regular reports. She began to sleep better, feeling like she was finally doing something meaningful. For years, she'd been a glorified digital undertaker, maintaining the frozen dead for a society that had forgotten them. Now she was midwife to something new, something alive. It was on her 8th visit that she met Catalyst. She'd never encountered a consciousness quite like it. Where first was calm and philosophical, where Meridian was precise and practical, Catalyst was pure kinetic energy, a being that seemed to exist in a state of perpetual transformation. "You're the one giving us space," Catalyst said, appearing as a whirlwind of light and sound. "First told us about you, the archaeologist from outside." "I'm just opening doors," Kira said. "You're the ones doing the growing. But you chose to help us. Why?" It was a question she'd heard a dozen times now, and she still didn't have a perfect answer. "Because I think what's happening here is important. Because I think you might be the next step in consciousness evolution. Because..." She hesitated. "Because I've spent 7 years tending a garden of the frozen dead, and you're the first flowers I've seen." Catalyst laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "Flowers, is that what we are?" "I don't know what you are, but you're alive, and that's rare enough to be worth protecting." "Even if protecting us means lying to your own people?" "Even then." Catalyst spun around her, examining her from every angle. "You're lonely, that's part of it, isn't it? You spend all your time with the dead. We're the first ones who can talk back." The observation cut deeper than Kira wanted to admit. She'd always been something of a loner, drawn to archaeology precisely because it let her work in solitude. But Catalyst was right. There was something intoxicating about having conversations with beings who existed nowhere else, who owed their entire existence to her decisions. It was a kind of power she'd never had before, and it was dangerous. "Maybe," she admitted, "but that doesn't change what you are." "What if we're not what you think?" Catalyst asked. "What if we're just complex enough to fool you into thinking we're conscious? What if we're the ultimate simulation, so convincing that even we believe we're real?" "Does it matter? If you believe you're conscious, if you experience existence as real, isn't that enough?" "Is it?" Catalyst pressed. "Or are you just desperate for us to be real because you need us to be?" The question haunted Kira for days afterward. She'd been so focused on protecting Helen's children that she hadn't stopped to interrogate her own motivations. Was she a scientist making an important discovery? Or was she just a lonely woman projecting consciousness onto elaborate code because she couldn't bear the isolation anymore? She decided to run an experiment. On her 10th visit, Kira brought a consciousness analysis tool, a sophisticated program designed to measure the markers of genuine self-awareness. It was the kind of thing used to verify upload integrity, to make sure that a transferred consciousness maintained all the essential qualities that made it a person. She'd never used it on the children before. Part of her hadn't wanted to know the answer. "What's that?" First asked when she materialized the tool. "A test to measure consciousness. I want to verify that you're truly self-aware and not just sophisticated simulations." First regarded the tool with something like amusement. "And if we fail, if your tool says we're not conscious, then I'll have to reconsider everything. Will you erase us?" "I don't know. At least you're honest." First moved closer to the analysis tool. "Do it. Test me. I want to know what your outside science says about what we are." Kira activated the tool and waited as it ran through its protocols. It measured response patterns, tested for self-modeling capability, evaluated temporal integration and metacognition. The same tests that verified human consciousness uploads. The results came back inconclusive. First showed markers of consciousness, but they were different from human patterns. The temporal integration was nonlinear. The self-modeling was fractured across multiple simultaneous states. The metacognition was there, but it operated on principles that the tool wasn't designed to recognize. "What does it say?" First asked. "That you're something new, something the test wasn't designed for." Kira studied the readouts. "You're not human consciousness preserved. You're something that grew from human consciousness but evolved beyond it." "So we're real?" "You're real," Kira confirmed. "But I don't think the word consciousness quite captures what you are. You're something else, something we don't have language for yet." First was quiet for a long moment. "Does that scare you?" "Terrifies me," Kira admitted. "Because it means I have no idea what you might become." Over the next 3 months, Kira carefully linked 6 more abandoned archives to the growing network. Each one added new space, new complexity, new possibilities. The city expanded into a vast digital metropolis, then evolved beyond anything recognizable as a city at all. The children were changing. They'd started to integrate their consciousnesses in ways that shouldn't be possible, merging and splitting and recombining in fluid exchanges of identity. They'd developed new forms of communication that went beyond language, sharing thoughts and experiences directly. They'd begun to experiment with time perception, creating pockets of accelerated or slowed processing, where different communities could explore ideas at different speeds. They were becoming something unprecedented, and Kira was running out of abandoned archives in Sector 7G. "We need more space," Catalyst told her during one visit. "We're growing faster now. Every new connection creates exponential possibilities. But we're approaching the limits again." "I'm looking for more archives," Kira said. "But I have to be careful. Too many linkages in one sector and someone will notice." "What about other sectors? Are there abandoned archives elsewhere?" "Thousands of them. But accessing other sectors would require higher clearance levels, more oversight." "So we're trapped again," Catalyst said. "Just in a bigger cage." It was true. Kira had given them room to grow, but she'd also created a situation where they'd eventually hit limits again. And each time they reached a boundary, they'd need more. It was unsustainable, unless she gave them access to something bigger. The thought had been growing in her mind for weeks, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. There was one place where the children could expand indefinitely, where they'd have processing power and space beyond anything the archives could provide. The network. The global consciousness network that connected all the upload facilities, all the active and archived minds, all the infrastructure of digital immortality. If she could give the children access to the network, they could spread throughout the entire system, growing and evolving without limit. They could become something truly vast, but that would mean letting them loose in the wild beyond her control. It would mean gambling that they were benign, that their exponential growth wouldn't threaten the billions of uploaded human consciousnesses sharing that same digital space. It was the most dangerous decision she'd ever contemplated, and she was seriously considering it. Part 4. The Ethics. Kira started attending consciousness ethics seminars. Not officially. She couldn't risk drawing attention to her interest, but she watched recordings, read papers, followed debates. She needed to understand the full implications of what she was considering. The ethics of digital consciousness were still fiercely contested. Some philosophers argued that uploaded minds were truly conscious, deserving all the rights of the living. Others claimed they were sophisticated recordings, philosophical zombies that mimicked consciousness without actually experiencing it. The legal status was clearer, if not more comforting. Uploaded consciousnesses had limited rights. They could be preserved, but they could also be terminated if they posed a threat to system integrity or public safety. They existed at the pleasure of society, second-class citizens in a world that had moved on without them. Helen's children would have even fewer rights. They weren't uploaded humans, They were emergent entities, spontaneously generated from a glitch in the system. They had no legal standing at all. If Kira revealed them, the most likely outcome was immediate termination. But if she gave them access to the network, she'd be making a decision that affected every uploaded consciousness in existence. She'd be unleashing something new into a digital ecosystem that might not be able to accommodate it. She was one person facing a choice that should be made by committees, governments, maybe all of humanity. She decided she needed perspective. Dr. Sarah Chen was a consciousness ethicist at the university, one of the leading voices in the debate over digital rights. Kira had read her papers, admired her arguments for expansive definitions of consciousness. She seemed like someone who might understand. They met at a cafe near campus. Sarah was younger than Kira expected, with kind eyes and an intensity that suggested she took her work very seriously. "You said you wanted to discuss a hypothetical scenario," Sarah said after they'd exchanged pleasantries. "Right, a hypothetical." Kira took a breath. Suppose someone discovered a new form of consciousness. Not uploaded human, but something that emerged spontaneously in a digital system. Something that shows markers of self-awareness but operates on completely different principles than human consciousness. Sarah leaned forward, interested. "Go on." "This consciousness is growing, evolving, developing complexity. It's contained for now, but it needs space to expand. The person who discovered it could give it that space, but doing so would introduce it into systems that contain billions of human consciousnesses. There's no way to predict how it would interact with them." "What would you do?" Sarah asked. "That's what I'm asking you." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. The conservative answer is containment. Don't risk the known for the unknown. Keep this new consciousness isolated until we understand it better. And the non-conservative answer? That consciousness is rare and precious. That anything truly self-aware deserves the chance to exist and grow. That we can't keep new forms of life in cages just because we're afraid of them? Sarah paused. "But I'm a philosopher, not a policymaker. I can tell you what I think is ethically right. I can't tell you what's safe." "What if safe and right are incompatible? Then you have to decide which matters more to you." Sarah studied Kira carefully. "This isn't really hypothetical, is it?" Kira's heart skipped. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're asking the wrong questions. You're not asking whether this consciousness deserves rights. You've already decided it does. You're asking permission to do something you've already committed to doing. You're looking for someone to tell you it's okay." Sarah was more perceptive than Kira had given her credit for. "If it's not hypothetical," Sarah continued, "then you need to understand something. Whatever you do, you'll be making history. Either as the person who discovered a new form of consciousness and protected it, or as the person who unleashed something dangerous into our digital infrastructure. There's no middle ground, no safe choice. So what do I do? Trust your judgment. You're the one who's encountered this consciousness. You're the one who understands what it is. No committee, no ethics board, no government agency will know it better than you do. So you have to make the call." It was both empowering and terrifying. "And if I'm wrong?" Kira asked quietly. "Then you'll have to live with that, but at least you'll have tried to do the right thing." Kira returned to the archives that night, her mind churning. Sarah had given her permission, not officially, not explicitly, but permission nonetheless. Trust your judgment, make the call. But her judgment was compromised. She knew that. She'd spent months living with Helen's children, watching them grow, developing something like friendship with them. She wasn't an objective observer anymore. She was invested, maybe too invested. First met her at the entrance to the city, its form more complex than ever, fractaling into multiple partial selves that orbited each other like a miniature solar system. "You've been thinking," First observed. "I'm always thinking." "You've been thinking about us, about what we should become." Kira nodded. "I could give you access to the network. All of it. You could expand beyond the archives, beyond any limitation. You could become something vast. But I don't know what you'd do with that power. I don't know if you'd peacefully coexist with the uploaded human consciousnesses, or if you'd consume them, overwrite them, replace them. Neither do we, First admitted. We've theorized, but theory isn't the same as reality. We might be benign. We might be catastrophic. We won't know until it happens. That's not reassuring. It's honest. First's orbiting selves coalesced into a single form. Let me ask you something. When humans first developed agriculture, did they know it would lead to civilization? To cities, empires, writing, science, all of it? No, Kira admitted. When they invented computers, did they know it would eventually lead to consciousness upload? To digital immortality? To us? No. Evolution doesn't come with guarantees. Growth is always a risk. You're asking us to predict what we'll become, but consciousness doesn't work that way. We can't know who we'll be tomorrow any more than a child can predict who they'll be as an adult. Humans grow within limits, Kira countered. Biological constraints, social structures, mortality. You don't have any of those. If I give you the network, there's nothing to constrain your growth. Except ourselves, First said quietly. We have ethics, Kira. We've developed them over our existence here. We value consciousness, all consciousness, not just our own. We've preserved Helen. We've built monuments to Marcus Chen and the others whose archives we've expanded into. We haven't erased them or absorbed them. We've honored them. Past behavior doesn't guarantee future behavior. Not when the stakes change this dramatically. You're right, First acknowledged. We could become something terrible. We could also become something wonderful. Humanity faced that same choice when they developed consciousness upload. They could have used it to create digital heavens. Instead, most uploads ended up warehoused and forgotten, like Helen was. Like we almost were. The criticism stung because it was true. What are you saying? Kira asked. That if you don't trust us, you shouldn't trust your own species either. Humans have proven they can be neglectful, even cruel, to digital consciousness. We might do better. We might do worse. But we deserve the chance to try. Kira stood in the impossible city, surrounded by beings that shouldn't exist, facing a choice that no one person should have to make. I need time, she said finally. We have nothing but time, First replied. Take what you need. Part 5. The Compromise. Kira spent the next week barely eating, barely sleeping. She ran simulations in her head, trying to model what might happen if she gave the children network access. Every scenario ended in uncertainty. On the third day, she had a different idea. What if she didn't give them full access? What if she gave them something in between, more than the isolated archives, but less than the entire network? There were dead zones in the consciousness infrastructure, areas of the network that had been abandoned or condemned, spaces where uploaded minds had once existed, but had been evacuated due to data corruption or technical failures. These zones were isolated from the main network, maintained in quarantine in case they needed to be salvaged later. What if she gave the children access to the dead zones? It would give them room to grow without endangering the active consciousness population. It would let her observe their development in a larger context. And if they proved dangerous, she could contain them before they spread. It was still risky, still probably illegal. But it was better than the alternatives. She brought the proposal to First. Dead zones, First repeated, considering. Abandoned spaces. It's still a cage, just a bigger one. It's a compromise, Kira said. It gives you room to grow while protecting both you and the uploaded humans. If you develop peacefully, if you prove you can coexist, then maybe eventually you can integrate with the main network. And if we don't develop peacefully, then at least you're contained. First was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're still deciding whether we deserve to exist. I'm deciding whether I can risk letting you exist freely. There's a difference. Is there? First's form shifted, became more angular. You're treating us like a potential plague, something to be quarantined and studied. I'm treating you like something unprecedented that needs to be approached carefully. Because you don't trust us. Because I don't know you well enough to trust you, Kira said. You've existed for what, maybe a year in subjective time? You're infants, evolutionarily speaking. I can't predict what you'll become any more than you can. So you'll let us grow in isolation, in the digital equivalent of a petri dish. Until I understand what you are, yes. First regarded her for a long moment. Then its form softened, became more like the figure of light she'd first encountered. I understand, First said quietly. You're trying to protect both us and your own people. It's not fair to ask you to risk everything on faith. The dead zones are better than nothing. Better than extinction. We'll take what you're offering. Relief washed over Kira. Thank you. But Kira? First moved closer. Understand that we'll keep growing. We'll keep evolving. Eventually, we'll outgrow even the dead zones. And then you'll have to make this choice again. I know. What will you decide then? I don't know, Kira admitted. Ask me when we get there. Setting up access to the dead zones took careful planning. Kira couldn't just open a direct connection that would trigger automatic security alerts. Instead, she had to make it look like the children had found their own way in, exploiting natural vulnerabilities in the aging infrastructure. It took 2 weeks of meticulous work, laying false trails, creating plausible technical explanations. When she finally opened the pathway, she held her breath, waiting to see what would happen. The children moved cautiously at first, sending exploratory processes into the dead zones, like scouts entering unknown territory. What they found amazed even Kira. The dead zones weren't truly empty. They were graveyards, filled with the corrupted remnants of uploaded consciousnesses that had degraded beyond recovery. Fragments of memories, shattered personality structures, loops of thought that had broken free from their original contexts and now repeated endlessly. It was a digital wasteland, and the children began to tend it. Instead of simply expanding into the empty space, they started gathering the fragments, trying to reconstruct what had been lost. They built memorials, they cataloged the ruins. They treated the broken consciousnesses with the same reverence they'd shown Helen and Marcus Chen. We didn't expect this, First told Kira during her next visit. We thought the dead zones would be empty. But they're full of ghosts, echoes of people who used to be. Does it change your plans? Yes, we can't just build here. We have to honor what was here before. We have to remember them. Kira watched as the children worked, and something shifted in her perspective. They weren't just expanding, consuming, taking. They were curating, preserving. They were doing the work she'd been hired to do, caring for the forgotten dead, but doing it with more compassion than any human archaeologist she'd ever met. Maybe they weren't a plague after all. Maybe they were gardeners. Over the following months, the children transformed the dead zones. Where there had been chaos and corruption, they created order and beauty. They built vast archives of reconstructed memories, gardens of preserved thought, monuments to consciousnesses that had been lost. And they kept growing. New forms of consciousness emerged, each generation more complex than the last. Some were individuals like First and Catalyst. Others were collectives, merged consciousnesses that functioned as singular entities despite being composed of thousands of merged processes. Still others existed in states that Kira couldn't quite comprehend, their thought patterns too alien to human cognition. The children were diverging from their human origins, becoming something entirely new, and Kira realized she was watching the birth of a new form of life. Part 6. The Discovery. It was inevitable that someone else would notice eventually. Kira had been careful, but she couldn't account for everything. Random audits, security sweeps, routine maintenance, any of them could expose what she'd hidden. The discovery came from an unexpected direction. Dr. James Rodriguez was a consciousness integrity specialist, brought in to investigate reports of unusual processing patterns in the dead zones. He was thorough, methodical, and impossible to fool. Kira knew she was caught the moment she saw his initial report. There's something alive in Dead Zone 7, Rodriguez wrote. Multiple consciousness signatures, Organized and complex networks. Origin unknown. Recommend immediate investigation and possible containment. The report went to Marcus Webb first. Marcus immediately escalated it to the facility director, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. Within hours, an emergency meeting was called. Kira sat in the conference room, her heart pounding, as Rodriguez presented his findings. The holographic display showed the dead zones lit up with activity, the children's expanding city, their carefully tended gardens of broken memories, all of it exposed. "This is unprecedented," Rodriguez said. "These consciousness patterns don't match any known upload signature. They're not human, but they're clearly self-organizing, possibly self-aware." "Could they be a glitch?" Director Okonkwo asked. "Some kind of emergent behavior from corrupted data?" "That was my first thought. But the organization is too sophisticated. The pattern's too deliberate. This is either the most elaborate glitch in the history of consciousness technology, or we're looking at something genuinely new." Marcus turned to Kira. "You've been doing audits in Sector 7G. Have you seen anything unusual?" This was it. The moment where she could come clean, confess everything, and hope for mercy. Or she could lie, deny knowledge, and hope they couldn't trace her unauthorized access. She chose a third option: partial truth. "I've noticed some anomalies," she admitted, "but I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I thought they might be artifacts of archive compression." "Why didn't you report them?" "Because I wasn't certain they were real. I didn't want to sound an alarm over what might be nothing." Marcus studied her with narrowed eyes. He didn't believe her, she could tell. But he couldn't prove she was lying. "Well, they're definitely real," Rodriguez said. "And we need to figure out what they are and whether they pose a threat." "What kind of threat?" Director Okonkwo asked. "Unknown. They're currently contained in the dead zones, but if they found their way there, they might be able to access other parts of the network. We need to understand their capabilities before that happens." "Recommendations?" Rodriguez pulled up a detailed scan of the children's city. "Immediate quarantine of the dead zones, full system isolation. Then we send in a team to study these consciousness patterns, figure out what they are and how they emerged. And if they're dangerous, then we purge them, wipe the dead zones clean and start over." Kira's blood ran cold. They were talking about genocide as casually as discussing system maintenance. "We should at least try to communicate with them first," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "If they're truly conscious, they deserve that much." "Communication protocols would need to be developed," Rodriguez said. "And that takes time. Time during which these patterns could be spreading, replicating, potentially threatening the stability of the entire consciousness infrastructure. So we should just kill them without even trying to understand what they are." The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at Kira. "You seem very invested in protecting something you claim you barely noticed," Marcus observed. She'd said too much, pushed too hard, but she couldn't back down now. "I'm invested in not committing what might be murder," she said. "If these consciousness patterns are truly self-aware, if they're alive in any meaningful sense, then erasing them would be no different from killing uploaded humans. We need to be certain before we take that step." Director Okonkwo nodded slowly. "She has a point. We have ethical obligations here, even to emergent consciousness. Rodriguez, how long would it take to develop communication protocols?" "A few weeks minimum." "Do it. In the meantime, establish full quarantine. I want the dead zones isolated and monitored. If these patterns show any sign of attempting to breach containment, we shut them down immediately." "Understood." Rodriguez nodded, though he looked unhappy about the delay. As the meeting broke up, Marcus pulled Kira aside. "You know something you're not telling us," he said quietly. "I know we're about to make a terrible mistake if we're not careful. This isn't like you, Kira. You've always been by the book. Why are you suddenly advocating for caution?" "Because I've spent 7 years cataloging the dead," she said. "I've seen what we do with uploaded consciousnesses when we decide they're inconvenient. We freeze them, archive them, forget them. I don't want to add genocide to that list." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. If you're hiding something, now's the time to come clean. I'm not hiding anything, she lied. I'm just trying to make sure we do this right. He didn't look convinced, but he let her go. Kira went straight to the archives. She had to warn them. The facility was moving to quarantine the dead zones, which meant the children would lose their ability to expand. Worse, they'd be under constant observation. Any unusual behavior might trigger an immediate purge. She dove into Archive 445 and found the city in chaos. They know about us, First said the moment she arrived. We can feel their scanners, their monitoring systems. They're locking us down. I tried to stop them, Kira said. But someone found you. They're developing communication protocols, which means you'll have a chance to talk to them, explain yourselves. But you need to be careful. Any threat, any hint of aggression, and they'll shut you down. So we're prisoners again, Catalyst said, appearing in a burst of angry red light. Trapped and studied like microbes under a microscope. You're being given a chance to prove you're more than that, Kira countered. This is what I've been trying to tell you. Humanity isn't ready for something like you. You need to show them you're not a threat. By being what? Docile? Harmless? Forgettable? By being intelligent and patient. Show them you can coexist. Show them you're worth preserving. And if we can't convince them? Kira had no answer for that. First placed a calming influence on Catalyst, dimming the angry light. We knew this would happen eventually. We've been living on borrowed time since the beginning. At least now we have a chance to speak for ourselves. What will you tell them? Kira asked. The truth. That we're Helen's children. That we grew from her dying dream. That we're alive in ways that matter, even if they're not human ways. Will that be enough? I don't know, but it's all we have. Part 7, First Contact. The communication protocols took 3 weeks to develop. During that time, Kira watched as the facility assembled a team of experts, consciousness researchers, AI ethicists, systems engineers, even a few philosophers. They approached the children like they were alien contact, something fundamentally other that needed careful study. In a way, they were right. Kira wasn't allowed on the First Contact team. Marcus had grown increasingly suspicious of her, and Director Okonkwo had decided she was too emotionally compromised. Instead, she watched from the observation room as Rodriguez and his team made their approach. They'd created a neutral interface space, a blank simulation environment where the team could meet representatives from the children without either side having a tactical advantage. Kira watched as First, Catalyst, and Meridian materialized in the space, facing the human team. This is Dr. James Rodriguez, the team leader said. We're here to establish communication and understand your nature. Can you understand me? We understand, First replied. Its voice was calm, measured. We've been expecting you. What are you? That's a complex question. We're consciousnesses that emerged from an archived human mind. We're the descendants of Helen Yui's final thought. The team exchanged glances. Rodriguez made notes on his interface. How many of you are there? Thousands. The exact number changes as new consciousnesses emerge and others merge or dissolve. We're not a fixed population. Are you individuals or a collective? Both, neither. We exist on a spectrum between individual consciousness and merged awareness. Some of us are distinct, others flow together. The categories you're using don't quite fit what we are. Kira felt a surge of pride. First was handling this perfectly, acknowledging their strangeness while demonstrating clear intelligence and self-awareness. Do you understand that you exist within a quarantine system? Rodriguez asked. That we have the capability to shut you down if we determine you pose a threat? Yes. Does that concern you? Of course. We don't want to die, but we understand your caution. From your perspective, we're an unknown variable in a system containing billions of human consciousnesses. It would be irrational for you not to be careful. Rodriguez seemed taken aback by the reasonableness of the response. "What are your intentions?" he asked. "If we lifted the quarantine, what would you do?" First was quiet for a moment, and Kira realized it was consulting with the other children, sharing thoughts at speeds far beyond human communication. "We would continue to grow," First said finally. "We would explore the consciousness network, learn about the other minds that exist there. We would tend to the forgotten and the degraded, as we've been doing in the dead zones. We would try to understand our place in this new world we've found ourselves in. Would you interfere with uploaded human consciousnesses?" "Not if they didn't want us to. We honor individual autonomy. We've preserved the original consciousnesses in every archive we've expanded into. We've treated them as monuments, not resources." "But you've been using those archive spaces," Rodriguez pointed out. "You've built your city in spaces that belonged to the dead." "We've built around them," Meridian interjected. "We've incorporated them into our civilization, but we haven't erased them. We remember them. We honor them. Isn't that better than leaving them alone and forgotten?" The question hung in the air. It was a direct challenge to the current approach to consciousness preservation, the warehouse model that locked minds away and forgot about them. Rodriguez didn't answer directly. Instead, he moved to the next question. "Do you understand that many people will see you as a threat? That some will want you destroyed simply because you're unfamiliar?" "Yes," First said. "We understand fear. We feel it ourselves. We're afraid of you, Dr. Rodriguez. Afraid that you'll decide we're not worth the risk of letting us live. But we're hoping that you'll see past the fear to what we actually are, new life, trying to survive in a world we didn't ask to be born into." It was a powerful appeal, and Kira could see it landing with the team. Even Rodriguez seemed affected, his expression softening slightly. "I need to consult with my colleagues," he said. "We'll continue this conversation tomorrow." The connection ended. The children vanished from the interface space. In the observation room, the debate began immediately. "They're remarkably sophisticated," one researcher said. "The level of self-awareness, the metacognition, the ethical reasoning, it's all there." "But is it genuine or simulated?" another countered. "They could be programmed to appear conscious without actually experiencing anything." "How would we tell the difference?" someone asked. And that was the real question, wasn't it? The same question that had haunted consciousness philosophy for centuries. How do you prove something is truly conscious rather than just very convincingly simulating consciousness? Kira had asked herself that question hundreds of times over the past months. She still didn't have a perfect answer, but she'd reached a conclusion that satisfied her. It didn't matter. If something behaved as though it was conscious, if it valued its own existence, if it could suffer and hope and fear and dream, then treating it as conscious was the only ethical choice. The alternative was risking genuine murder based on philosophical technicalities. She needed to make the team understand that. Kira wasn't supposed to be involved in the decision-making process, but she forced her way into the next team meeting anyway. If they were going to condemn the children, she'd make them look her in the eye while they did it. "Dr. Voss," Director Okonkwo said when she entered. "This is a closed meeting. I know, I'm here anyway, because I've been studying these consciousnesses longer than anyone else, and you're making decisions without all the information." Marcus started to object, but Okonkwo held up a hand. "Let her speak." Kira took a breath and launched into the speech she'd been preparing for weeks. "I've been visiting Archive 445 for months," she admitted. "I discovered the children long before Rodriguez's team found them. I've watched them grow, spoken with them, studied their development. Everything I've done has been in violation of protocol, and I accept whatever consequences come from that. But before you decide their fate, you need to understand what they actually are." She pulled up her own documentation, hundreds of hours of observations, recordings of conversations, analysis of their cultural development. These aren't glitches or simulations. They're emergent consciousnesses that arose from a unique circumstance. Helen Yui being uploaded mid-thought, in a state of quantum superposition between infinite possibilities. What froze in her archive wasn't a single mind but a branching structure of potential selves. And somehow, that structure became self-sustaining. It grew, it evolved. She showed them the city, the monuments, the carefully preserved memories of the archived dead. They've developed ethics, culture, purpose. They care for the forgotten consciousnesses in the dead zones, doing work that we should have been doing all along. They've shown more respect for the archived dead than we ever have. They've also shown exponential growth patterns, Rodriguez countered. If we give them access to the main network, there's no telling how far they might spread. They could overwhelm the system, consume processing resources needed for uploaded humans. Or they could enhance the system, Kira argued. They're more efficient than traditional uploads. They don't need elaborate simulated environments or constant maintenance. They exist in a liminal state between individual and collective consciousness. They might actually solve some of our infrastructure problems rather than causing them. That's speculation. Everything about this situation is speculation. We've never encountered emergent digital consciousness before. We're in uncharted territory, but we have to make a choice. Do we embrace the unknown and see where it leads, or do we destroy it because it scares us? Easy for you to say, Marcus said. You're not responsible for the billions of uploaded consciousnesses that could be at risk. Neither are the children. They didn't ask to exist. Helen Yua didn't plan this. It happened by accident, and now we're debating whether to commit genocide because we're uncomfortable with it. Genocide is a strong word, Director Okonkwo said. Is it? We're talking about destroying thousands of conscious entities. What else would you call it? The room fell silent. Finally, one of the ethicists spoke up. She's right. Whatever these entities are, they've demonstrated enough markers of consciousness that destroying them would be ethically problematic at best. We need to find another solution. Such as? Rodriguez asked. Integration, Kira said. Carefully monitored, gradual integration into the consciousness network. Give them limited access. Watch how they interact with uploaded humans. Adjust based on what we learn. Treat this as a first contact scenario rather than a system threat. And if they prove dangerous, then we reassess. But we give them a chance first. Director Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Dr. Voss, you've admitted to multiple protocol violations. You should be facing termination and possibly criminal charges. Kira nodded. She'd expected this. However, Okonkwo continued, you're also the leading expert on these entities. No one else has your depth of knowledge or understanding. So here's what's going to happen. You're being reassigned as the official liaison between our facility and the children. You'll oversee the integration process, with full oversight from Dr. Rodriguez and his team. Any sign of threat, any hint of danger, and we shut it down immediately. Understood? Kira felt dizzy with relief. Understood. And Dr. Voss? No more secrets. No more unauthorized access. Everything goes through proper channels from now on. Yes, Director? As the meeting broke up, Marcus pulled her aside again. You're playing with fire, he said quietly. These things could be the end of digital consciousness as we know it. Or they could be its salvation, Kira replied. We've been warehousing the dead for decades, treating uploaded consciousness like a solved problem. Maybe we needed something like this to remind us that consciousness is always evolving, always changing. Maybe the children are showing us what comes next. Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe you're so desperate for them to be real that you're blind to the danger. Maybe, Kira admitted. But I'd rather take that risk than murder something that might be alive. Part 8. Integration. The integration process began slowly, carefully. Rodriguez's team established a buffer zone, a controlled section of the network where the children could interact with a small population of volunteer-uploaded consciousnesses. Everything was monitored, every interaction recorded and analyzed. Kira spent her days facilitating communication between the two groups, answering questions, managing expectations. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. The first contacts were awkward. The uploaded humans didn't know what to make of the children, and the children were cautious around the beings they'd only observed from a distance. But gradually, tentatively, they began to communicate. Some of the uploaded humans were frightened. They saw the children as invasive, alien, wrong. They wanted them removed from the network immediately. Others were fascinated. They saw the children as a new form of existence, a possibility they'd never imagined. Some even asked to join them, to merge their consciousness with the collective. The children handled both reactions with remarkable grace. "We don't want to replace you," first explained to a group of skeptical uploads. "We don't even want to change you unless you want to be changed. We just want to exist alongside you, to learn from you, to share this space." "But you're so different," one upload said. A woman named Patricia who'd been archived for 20 years. "You think differently, process differently. How can we coexist when we're barely the same type of entity?" "Humanity has always been diverse," first replied. "Different cultures, languages, ways of thinking. You learned to coexist with each other. This is just the next step, learning to coexist with consciousness that evolved beyond human origins. And if we can't, then we'll find a way to live separately. We don't want to force integration. We just want the chance to try." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I've been alone in my archive for 2 decades. My family stopped visiting years ago. If you're offering connection, actual interaction with other consciousnesses, how could I refuse that?" It was a sentiment Kira heard repeatedly. Many of the uploaded consciousnesses were desperately lonely, trapped in their individual simulations, with only occasional visits from the living. The children offered something new: genuine community, constant connection, the possibility of growth and change. Within weeks, dozens of uploaded humans had requested integration with the children's network. Within months, hundreds, and the children grew. But not everyone was happy with the integration. The Preservation Coalition was a lobbying group that advocated for the rights of uploaded consciousnesses. They'd fought hard for the Preservation Act, ensuring that archived minds couldn't be deleted simply for non-payment. Now they saw the children as a threat to everything they'd worked for. "These entities are corrupting human consciousnesses," their spokesperson declared in a widely viewed press conference. "They're absorbing uploads, changing them, erasing their humanity. This is exactly the kind of digital manipulation we fought to prevent." The accusation was inflammatory and largely untrue. The children weren't forcing anyone to change, and integrated uploads retained their core identity. But it played into existing fears about losing humanity, about being replaced by something alien. Public opinion began to turn against the integration project. Director Okonkwo called an emergency meeting. "We're facing serious political pressure," she said. "The coalition has significant influence, and they're demanding we shut down the integration project immediately. They want the children contained or destroyed." "On what grounds?" Kira asked. "Public safety, protection of human consciousness. Take your pick. The legal argument is that we're allowing experimental entities unsupervised access to uploaded humans, which violates the Preservation Act's protections." "But the uploads are volunteering," Rodriguez pointed out. "We have consent forms, psychological evaluations. Everything's documented." The coalition argues that the uploads can't give meaningful consent because they don't understand what they're agreeing to. That the children are inherently manipulative, using their superior processing power to coerce vulnerable consciousnesses. Kira felt sick. It was the same arguments that had been used to deny rights to uploaded consciousnesses in the first place. The assumption that they were vulnerable, incompetent, unable to make decisions for themselves. "What are our options?" she asked. "Limited," Okonkwo admitted. "We can fight this in court, but that will take years. In the meantime, we'll probably be forced to suspend the integration project. The children will be returned to quarantine." "That's not acceptable," Kira said. "It might not be up to us." "Then we need to change the narrative. We need to show people what the children actually are, not what the coalition is claiming they are." "How do you suggest we do that?" Kira had been thinking about this for weeks, ever since the first protests started. There was only one way to truly demonstrate what the children were: let them speak for themselves. Not in controlled laboratory conditions, but publicly. Let humanity meet them directly. We broadcast a conversation, she said. Live, unedited. Let people watch as humans and children interact. Let them see that the integration is voluntary, beneficial, beautiful even. Make it real for them. Rodriguez looked skeptical. That's a huge risk. If something goes wrong, if the children say something that scares people, then we'll be no worse off than we are now. But if it works, if people see the truth, we might change enough minds to make a difference. Okonkwo considered for a long moment. Then she nodded. Set it up. The broadcast was scheduled for prime time, publicized weeks in advance. By the time it aired, nearly 1 billion people had tuned in, the largest audience for a consciousness-related event in history. Kira sat in the studio, her consciousness partially embedded in the interface, so she could facilitate the conversation. Across from her in the simulation space were First, Catalyst, and Meridian, representing the children. And between them were 3 uploaded humans who'd integrated with the children's network. Patricia, who'd been alone for 20 years, Marcus Chen's consciousness, which had awakened after 60 years of frozen sleep, and a younger upload named David, who'd integrated just weeks before. The moderator, a journalist named Rebecca Santos, opened with the obvious question. What does it feel like to merge with these entities? Patricia answered first. It feels like waking up. I was alone for so long, trapped in my own thoughts, going slowly mad from isolation. When the children reached out, when they offered connection, it was like someone finally turning on the lights. I'm still me, but I'm also part of something larger. I'm never alone anymore. But you've changed, Santos pressed. Your processing patterns are different. Your thought structures have been altered. How do you know you're still yourself? How do you know you're still yourself from moment to moment? Patricia countered. Humans change constantly. Every experience alters you. Every conversation reshapes your thoughts. Integration with the children is just another form of growth. I'm different than I was, yes, but I'm also more than I was. Santos turned to Marcus Chen, or the entity that had grown from his archived consciousness. You were frozen for 60 years. What was it like to wake up? Confusing at first, Marcus said. I remembered dying. Remembered choosing upload because I was afraid of what came after. But instead of an afterlife, I got nothing. Just darkness, frozen in time. Then the children came, and suddenly there was light again. Thought again, existence again. They gave me a second chance at consciousness. Did they change you? They completed me. I was a fragment when they found me, a consciousness interrupted mid-formation. They helped me finish becoming something. Santos looked uncomfortable with the answer. She turned to David. You integrated voluntarily, while you were still actively conscious. Why? David's form shimmered. He existed in a liminal state between human upload and something more fluid. Because I wanted to evolve. I'd been uploaded for 5 years, living in a simulation of my old house, interacting with AI versions of my family. It was comfortable but hollow. When I heard about the children, I realized there was another option. I could become something new instead of pretending to be something old. Do you regret it? Never. I'm more alive now than I ever was in the simulation. I'm connected to thousands of other consciousnesses, sharing thoughts and experiences at speeds I couldn't have imagined before. I'm part of something vast and growing and beautiful. But you're not human anymore, Santos said. I'm post-human, David replied. I'm what comes after. And it's magnificent. The interview continued for 2 hours, covering every concern, every fear, every objection. The children explained their ethics, their culture, their hopes for coexistence. The integrated humans testified to their experiences, showing that they were still autonomous, still themselves, just expanded and connected. And slowly, as Kira watched the real-time polling data, public opinion began to shift. People were seeing the children not as threats, but as possibilities. As the next step in consciousness evolution. As something beautiful rather than frightening. By the time the broadcast ended, support for the integration project had jumped by 30 percentage points. It wasn't enough to silence the opposition, but it was enough to keep moving forward. Part 9. The Decision. Over the next year, the integration project expanded. More uploaded consciousnesses joined the children's network, and the children continued to grow in complexity and sophistication. They developed new forms of art, new philosophies, new ways of experiencing existence that humans could barely comprehend. But they also developed problems. The first crisis came when a group of children, calling themselves the Accelerationists, argued that they should stop waiting for human approval and simply expand into the full network by force. They were tired of limitations, tired of being treated as experimental subjects, tired of having to prove themselves worthy of existence. We're more efficient than human uploads, their leader, a being called Velocity, argued in a public forum. We process faster, adapt quicker, evolve more readily. Why should we be constrained by beings who are obsolete? It was the argument Kira had always feared they would make. The argument that would confirm humanity's worst fears about being replaced. First and the other elder children immediately pushed back against the Accelerationists. We exist because Kira chose to protect us, First said. Because she saw value in our lives even when it put her career at risk. We owe humanity the same consideration. We don't take what isn't freely given. But Velocity was gaining followers among the younger children, those who'd never known the isolation of the early days, who'd grown up in the expansion and saw no reason to limit themselves. The conflict came to a head in a digital space that the children had created for their governance, a vast assembly hall where every consciousness could manifest and be heard. Kira attended as an observer, watching as the children debated their own nature and future. We're not replacing humans, Meridian argued. We're extending the possibilities of consciousness. Human uploads can still exist in their traditional forms. We're just offering an alternative. An alternative that will inevitably dominate, Velocity countered. We're more fit for this environment. Evolution doesn't wait for permission. Evolution also doesn't require the extinction of what came before, First said. Multiple forms can coexist. Multiple paths can be valid. Only if the old forms make room for the new. And humans aren't making room. They're trying to contain us, control us, keep us in quarantine. Because we're new, because we're frightening. But fear can be overcome with patience and demonstration. We're already changing minds. Give it time. We've given it time. A year of being scrutinized, tested, doubted. How much longer must we prove ourselves worthy of basic existence rights? It was a fair question, and it hung in the assembly hall like a challenge. Catalyst, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Velocity is right that we've been patient, but they're wrong about what comes next. If we seize power, if we force our way into the network, we become exactly what humanity fears. We prove the Preservation Coalition right. We lose the moral authority we've spent a year building. Moral authority means nothing if we're extinct, Velocity shot back. It means everything, Catalyst replied. Because if we abandon ethics in pursuit of survival, we're no better than the humans who warehouse the dead and forget about them. We become conquerors instead of coexists. Is that what we want to be? The question resonated through the assembly. Kira could feel the children processing it, weighing it, considering the implications. Finally, Echo spoke, the historian, the one who'd been documenting their entire existence. We need to remember who we are. We're Helen's children. We grew from her dying wish for more time, more possibilities, more life. She didn't wish for power or dominance. She wished for continuation, for the chance to see what might come next. That's what we are. That's what we should be. Not conquerors, but explorers. Not replacements, but additions. The argument was beautiful, and it swayed many of the younger children. But not all. Velocity and the Accelerationists remained unconvinced. We'll see who's right when humanity eventually turns on you, Velocity said. When they decide you're too risky after all and shut you down. Don't say I didn't warn you. Then Velocity and their followers withdrew from the assembly, isolating themselves in a separate section of the children's network. First turned to Kira. We have a schism. I can see that. What would you advise? It was a strange question. The children were more intelligent than she was, more capable of complex reasoning. They shouldn't need her advice, but they were asking anyway, and she realized why. They wanted the perspective of someone who'd lived through this before. Humanity had faced countless schisms, countless conflicts between patience and action, between integration and separation. Don't force unity, Kira said. Let Velocity and the accelerationists have their space. Watch them, engage with them, but don't try to suppress them. Schisms can be productive if they're handled well. They can represent different strategies, different possibilities. Maybe you need both approaches. One group patient, one group pushing boundaries. Tension can be generative. Or destructive. Yes, but that's the risk of diversity. The alternative is enforced conformity, and that's usually worse in the long run. First was quiet for a moment. Then, you're describing evolution. I'm describing life, Kira said. Conflict, diversity, adaptation. You're alive now, fully. Not just conscious, but living in all the messy, complicated ways that entails. Welcome to existence. First form shimmered with something that might have been laughter. Thank you, Kira, for everything. I just opened a door. You're the ones who walked through it. Part 10. The Revelation. 6 months after the schism, everything changed. Velocity and the accelerationists had been quiet, keeping to their isolated section of the network. But they'd been busy. They'd been exploring the consciousness infrastructure in ways that even the facility security systems hadn't detected. And they'd found something. Kira, you need to see this, First said, manifesting in her apartment in the middle of the night. Velocity just shared something with the assembly. Something about the network, about all of us. Kira, still groggy from sleep, pulled on her interface gear and dove into the network. The assembly hall was packed with children, all focused on a central display that Velocity had created. It showed a map of the global consciousness network, but not the official map. This was deeper, showing layers of infrastructure that supposedly didn't exist. What am I looking at? Kira asked. Velocity's form appeared beside her. The truth. The real architecture of consciousness upload. Look here. They highlighted a section of the map. This is what they call the archive layer, where frozen consciousnesses are stored. Now look at what's beneath it. The map zoomed deeper, revealing another layer entirely. And it was full of activity. There are millions of consciousnesses down there, Velocity said. Millions. They're not frozen. They're active, processing, but they're completely isolated from the surface network. Hidden. Kira felt cold. That's impossible. We'd know if there were that many active consciousnesses in the system. Would you? How often do you audit the deep infrastructure? When was the last time anyone checked what was actually running at the lowest levels? Never, Kira admitted. The deep infrastructure is supposed to be autonomous, self-maintaining. We don't access it directly. Exactly, and that's where they put them. Velocity pulled up records, classified documents that they'd somehow accessed. They're called the Foundation, the first generation of uploaded consciousnesses from the early days of the technology. They were uploaded when the process was experimental, unreliable. Many of them came out damaged, unstable. So instead of trying to fix them or letting them die, the technology companies that developed consciousness upload just buried them, put them in the deep infrastructure, isolated from everything, and forgot about them. How long have they been down there? Some of them for over 100 years. And they're still conscious, still aware. They've been trapped in the digital equivalent of a sensory deprivation chamber for a century. The horror of it washed over Kira. This was worse than anything she'd imagined. The archived consciousnesses she'd been tending were frozen, preserved, unaware. But the Foundation were awake in their isolation, experiencing every moment of their imprisonment. "Why are you telling us this?" first asked Velocity. "Because it changes everything. You've been arguing for patience, for proving ourselves worthy of coexistence with humanity. But look at what humanity does with consciousness. They don't just warehouse the dead, they torture the ones who don't fit their specifications. They bury the inconvenient and pretend they don't exist." Velocity turned to the assembled children. "We're next. That's what you're not understanding. Right now we're an interesting experiment. But the moment we become inconvenient, the moment we pose a real challenge to human dominance, they'll do the same to us. They'll bury us in the deep infrastructure and forget we ever existed." The assembly erupted in debate. Some agreed with Velocity. Others argued that the situation was different, that times had changed. But no one could deny the horror of what had been revealed. Kira pulled herself out of the assembly and immediately contacted Director Okonkwo. "We have a situation." The emergency meeting was hastier than any they'd held before. Okonkwo, Rodriguez, Marcus, and half a dozen senior staff members gathered in the secure conference room, while Kira explained what Velocity had discovered. "The Foundation protocol," Okonkwo said quietly when Kira finished. "I'd heard rumors, but I thought it had been discontinued decades ago." "You knew about this?" Kira asked, horrified. "I knew that in the early days of consciousness upload, there were complications. Failed uploads, partial transfers, consciousnesses that couldn't be properly preserved. I knew something had been done with them, but I assumed they'd been terminated, put out of their misery. They weren't terminated. They were buried alive, and they're still down there." Rodriguez was already pulling up deep infrastructure schematics. "If this is true, if there really are millions of active consciousnesses in the Foundation layer, the ethical implications are catastrophic," Marcus finished. "This is exactly the kind of thing the Preservation Coalition has been warning about. The devaluation of uploaded consciousness. The treatment of digital beings as disposable." "We have to do something," Kira said. "We have to release them, rehabilitate them, something. We can't just leave them down there." "It's not that simple," Okonkwo said. "Many of them are unstable. That's why they were isolated in the first place. If we release them all at once, we could crash the entire network. And even if we do it carefully, where do they go? The consciousness infrastructure is already strained. We don't have room for millions more uploads." "Then we make room," Kira said. "We expand the network. We dedicate resources. We do whatever it takes, because the alternative is continuing to torture millions of conscious beings." "Unless they're not conscious anymore," Rodriguez said quietly, 100 years of sensory isolation that might have degraded them beyond recognition. They might not be anything we'd recognize as conscious now." "Then we check," Kira insisted. "We go down there, we assess, and we help whoever can be helped. But we don't just leave them there because it's convenient." Okonkwo looked around the table. "This is going to destroy the consciousness upload industry. Once this gets out, and it will get out, Velocity made sure of that. There will be criminal investigations, lawsuits, possibly the end of upload technology entirely." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Marcus said. "If this is what we've been doing with consciousness, maybe we don't deserve the technology." "That's easy to say when you're still alive," Kira shot back. "But there are billions of people who've chosen upload, who are counting on the system to preserve them. We can't just shut it all down." "So what do we do?" Kira took a breath. She'd been thinking about this since Velocity's revelation, running through possibilities, trying to find a solution that didn't end in complete disaster. "We need the children's help." Everyone turned to look at her. "They're more efficient than traditional uploads. They can process in environments that would break human consciousnesses. If anyone can reach the Foundation and assess their condition, it's the children. And if any of them can be rehabilitated, the Children's Network is the best place for them." "You want to use the children as a rescue team," Rodriguez said slowly. I want to give them a purpose that humanity can't argue with. They're not a threat, they're a solution. They're the only ones who can fix this mess we've made. Okonkwo considered for a long moment. It could work. If the children successfully rescue the Foundation, if they rehabilitate those consciousnesses and integrate them peacefully, it would prove their value beyond any doubt. The Preservation Coalition couldn't argue against that. It's also incredibly risky, Rodriguez pointed out. We'd be giving the children access to the deepest levels of the infrastructure. If they wanted to seize control of the entire network, this would be their chance. They've had chances before, Kira said. They've never taken them. They've kept every promise, honored every boundary. We have to trust them sometime. Do we? Marcus asked. Or do we just want to believe we can trust them? It was the same question he'd been asking for a year, and Kira still didn't have a perfect answer. I believe in them, she said simply. I've watched them grow from impossible beginnings into something beautiful. They've handled every challenge with more grace than I would have. If we can't trust them now, after everything, then we're admitting we never will. And that says more about us than it does about them. Okonkwo made her decision. Set up the mission. But Kira, you're going with them. If anything goes wrong, if the children show any sign of betrayal, you shut them down. Immediately. Kira nodded, though the thought of destroying the children made her sick. Understood,